The great chamber of the Galactic Concord floated high above the silver world of Ethra. Thousands of lights glowed across the curved ceiling while leaders from hundreds of civilizations sat in massive rows around the circular hall. Some were covered in shining armor. Others floated inside transparent tanks filled with strange liquids. A few communicated only through glowing machines beside them. At the center of the chamber stood Commander Elias Vey of Earth. He looked small compared to the towering alien delegates around him. His dark military coat was old and worn from years of service along the outer colonies. Many of the alien leaders barely looked at him while he spoke. The disappearances near the Sol Fringe are increasing, Elias said calmly. Entire stations are going silent. Trade routes are empty. Something dangerous is moving through deep space. Soft whispers spread across the chamber. One alien delegate from the Velker Dominion leaned forward with amusement in his glowing eyes. His name was Kelter, one of the Concord's highest military strategists. Humanity sees danger everywhere, Kelter said. Your species evolved through constant conflict. Fear controls your judgment. Several delegates gave sounds of agreement. Another delegate laughed quietly. Perhaps another pirate group frightened the humans. More laughter followed. Elias remained silent for a moment. He had expected this reaction. Humanity had never been respected inside the Concord. Earth was considered young, emotional, unstable, and physically weak compared to older civilizations. Humans argued too much. Humans broke rules. Humans made reckless decisions. To the Concord, humanity was a primitive species pretending to belong among giants. Elias touched a control panel beside him. A hologram appeared above the chamber. It showed drifting wreckage from a destroyed alien patrol fleet near the edge of mapped space. No weapons damage, Elias explained. No survivors. Their ships attacked each other before all contact ended. The chamber grew quieter. Kelter studied the images carefully. A system malfunction. It happened to 7 fleets, Elias replied. Before Kelter could answer, another hologram suddenly appeared above the chamber. Red warning symbols flashed across the air. An emergency transmission. The entire chamber became silent. A frightened alien officer appeared on the hologram. Sparks flew behind him while warning sirens screamed in the background. This is Outpost Seraph 9, the officer shouted. Unknown vessels emerging from dark space. They're inside the defense perimeter already. The image shook violently. Behind the officer, strange black shapes moved across the stars. They looked alive. Massive biomechanical ships twisted through space like giant metal creatures covered in glowing red veins. The officer's voice trembled. They're inside our systems, there. Suddenly the transmission distorted. Every screen inside the chamber filled with violent static. Then came screaming. Alien delegates watched in horror as Seraph 9's own defense fleet turned against itself. Ships fired wildly at friendly vessels. Entire cruisers exploded without warning. Soldiers ran through burning corridors while lights flickered around them. Something was infecting their systems. Their machines. Their minds. One by one, the screens went black. The chamber remained frozen in silence. For the first time, nobody laughed at humanity. Kelter slowly stood from his seat. Where did these vessels come from? Elias answered quietly. We don't know. Hours later, panic spread across the Galactic Concord. Emergency fleets launched toward the outer sectors. Defense systems activated across core worlds. News of the attack raced through interstellar networks faster than light itself. But the fear only grew worse. Every fleet sent against the unknown enemy vanished. Some disappeared completely. Others destroyed themselves. Entire command systems collapsed after strange signals infected military AIs. No species understood what they were fighting. Within days, millions were dead. On Earth, storm clouds rolled across the skies above New Geneva Spaceport while civilians rushed through crowded streets below giant holographic news screens. People watched burning alien ships drift through space on live broadcasts. Every channel carried the same terrifying message. Unknown hostile force advancing toward inner systems. Inside an old orbital command building, Elias stood beside Dr. Mira Solin as they studied incoming reports. Mira looked exhausted. Her dark hair was tied back carelessly, and her eyes were fixed on streams of biological data moving across the screen. "These signals aren't random," she said quietly. Elias looked at her. "What do you mean?" "They're alive somehow." She enlarged one of the wave patterns. "The transmissions adapt every time someone tries to block them. Like a nervous system learning." Elias frowned. "That's impossible." "I know." Another officer entered the room quickly. "Commander, emergency message from the Concorde." The room became silent as the transmission opened. A cold artificial voice filled the command center. "Due to ongoing military losses, all Concorde resources are being redirected to defend core territories. Outer systems are advised to begin independent survival operations." Elias stared at the screen. "Independent survival," he repeated. The voice continued. "The Sol system is classified as strategically expendable." The transmission ended. No one in the room spoke. Earth had just been abandoned. Far above the planet, hundreds of civilian ships attempted to leave orbit at once. Families packed into overcrowded transports. Supply stations emptied within hours. Fear spread across every human colony in the system. But unlike the other civilizations, humanity did not collapse. Factories reopened overnight. Old warships were pulled from storage. Mining crews turned industrial lasers into weapons. Civilian pilots volunteered for defense patrols even knowing they would probably die. Fear moved through humanity like fire. But it did not stop them. It pushed them forward. Late that night, Elias walked alone through one of Earth's orbital defense platforms. Workers rushed around him carrying tools and ammunition while damaged ships were repaired at impossible speed. Many of the people there were not soldiers. They were mechanics. Dock workers. Teachers. Students. One young technician looked up at Elias while tightening armor plates onto an old interceptor ship. "Do you think we can win?" she asked. Elias looked through the station window toward the dark stars beyond Earth. Somewhere out there, entire civilizations were burning. He should have felt hopeless. Instead, he felt something else. Determination. Humans had survived wars, disasters, famines, and centuries of violence on a dangerous world long before reaching the stars. Survival was part of them. Even now. Especially now. Suddenly alarms echoed across the station. A terrified voice shouted through the speakers. Unknown vessels entering the Sol fringe. Workers froze. Far beyond the station window, tiny red lights appeared in the darkness. More lights followed. Then hundreds more. The biomechanical ships had arrived. For a brief moment, silence filled the station. Everyone understood what was coming. Elias slowly activated the station-wide communication channel. His voice spread across every ship, station, and colony in the Sol system. The first ships of the Void Swarm moved slowly through the outer edge of the Sol system like giant shadows crawling across space. Their black biomechanical bodies twisted and changed shape as they traveled. Red lights pulsed across their surfaces like living veins. Everywhere they appeared, communication signals failed. The silence terrified people more than the ships themselves. Near Jupiter's mining colonies, hundreds of human workers watched the enemy fleet through old station windows covered in dust and scratches. The workers were not soldiers. Most had spent their lives breaking asteroids apart for fuel and minerals. Now they held rifles with shaking hands. Inside mining station Helios 7, alarms echoed through narrow metal halls while crews rushed between control rooms carrying heavy equipment. Commander Elias Vey stood beside a large holographic map of the Sol system. Red warning symbols flashed everywhere. "We can't match them ship for ship," one officer said nervously. "Their fleet is too large." Elias nodded quietly. "Then we stop fighting like a normal fleet." The officer looked confused. Before he could speak again, a young mechanic entered the room carrying a datapad covered in grease stains. "We finished modifying the cargo haulers," she said. Elias gave a small smile. "Good. Send them to Titan orbit." The officer frowned. "Cargo ships?" "They're not cargo ships anymore," Elias replied. Far across the station, workers loaded old transport vessels with explosive mining fuel. Others welded thick metal plates onto civilian ships while engineers connected industrial drilling lasers directly into power cores. Nothing looked clean or professional. Human ships never did. One cargo pilot stared nervously at the explosives packed behind his cockpit. "If this thing overloads, we're dead before launch." Another pilot laughed weakly. "Then don't fly badly." Fear hung over every room, every hallway, every ship. But nobody stopped working. On Earth, giant factories reopened for the first time in decades. Old military equipment was dragged from underground bunkers. Farmers, mechanics, engineers, and delivery pilots volunteered for defense duty. Humanity was changing. Not into disciplined soldiers like the great alien empires. Into survivors. Meanwhile, aboard the command vessel of the Velker Dominion, strategist Kelter studied reports from the Sol system with growing concern. Around him, alien officers moved quickly between glowing consoles. "Human defensive patterns make no sense," one officer said. Kelter narrowed his glowing eyes. "What happened now?" The officer activated a battlefield recording. A human mining station appeared on screen surrounded by void swarm fighters. The station looked damaged and powerless. "Humans transmitted surrender signals," the officer explained. The video continued. As the swarm ships moved closer, the entire mining station suddenly exploded. Hidden engines buried inside nearby asteroids activated at the same moment, launching massive rocks directly into the enemy formation. Several swarm vessels shattered instantly. The officer looked disturbed. The humans destroyed their own station to create the trap. Another recording appeared. This time, old human cargo ships drifted helplessly through space while swarm drones surrounded them. Without warning, the cargo ships accelerated at full speed and rammed directly into the enemy fleet. Explosions lit the darkness. Kelter remained silent for several seconds. "Why would civilian pilots sacrifice themselves?" he finally asked. No one answered. Because no one understood humans anymore. Near Saturn, the battle for Titan Station had already begun. The station floated above the moon like a giant ring of steel covered in defense cannons and repair docks. Thousands of civilians remained trapped inside after evacuation routes were cut off. Void swarm ships surrounded the station from every direction. Inside the crowded defense control room, smoke filled the air while warning sirens screamed endlessly. Dr. Mira Solin moved between injured workers, helping medics carry supplies. One of the station officers looked at the tactical screen with fear. "We've lost outer defenses." Another explosion shook the station violently. The lights flickered. Mira grabbed a railing to stay upright. "How long until evacuation?" she asked. The officer looked pale. "There is no evacuation." Outside the station windows, black swarm vessels moved closer through the darkness. Then the station speakers activated. Commander Elias Vey's voice filled every corridor. "All reactor teams report ready." Mira froze. Her eyes widened in horror. He's not planning to. The officer nodded slowly. He is. Deep beneath Titan Station, human engineers stood beside the station's massive fusion reactors. Sweat rolled down their faces while warning lights flashed red around them. One engineer opened a communication channel. "Commander, overload sequence is ready." Elias stood aboard a damaged command cruiser several thousand kilometers away. His face remained calm even while battle reports flooded his screen. "Understood," he answered quietly. A younger officer beside him looked shocked. "There are still civilians on that station." Elias looked at the tactical display. The swarm already breached the lower sectors. If Titan falls, they gain direct access to the inner colonies. The officer lowered his head silently. Across Titan Station, frightened civilians held each other as evacuation alarms echoed through the halls. Many cried. Many prayed. But others kept working. Engineers repaired failing doors. Medics treated wounded soldiers. Volunteers carried ammunition toward defense lines already collapsing. Fear was everywhere. Yet humanity kept moving. Outside the station, the Void Swarm began boarding operations. Black biomechanical creatures crawled across the hull like insects. Then Titan Station suddenly powered down. The lights vanished. Weapons went silent. For a moment, everything became dark. The swarm ships moved closer. That was exactly what Elias wanted. A small smile appeared on his tired face. Trigger the overload. Deep inside Titan Station, the fusion reactors erupted. A massive wave of white light exploded outward into space. The station tore itself apart in seconds. The shockwave swallowed nearby swarm vessels before they could escape. Entire enemy formations vanished inside the explosion. Even ships thousands of kilometers away lost systems from the energy burst. Silence filled the battlefield. Then shocked voices erupted across alien communication channels. The humans had destroyed their own colony just to stop the enemy advance. Kelter stared at the battle recordings in disbelief. "No species behaves like this," one alien officer whispered. But the horror was not finished. Scans soon detected escape pods leaving the explosion debris. Thousands of humans had survived by hiding deep inside shielded mining tunnels before the detonation. It had all been planned. Kelter slowly stood from his command chair. "The humans predicted their own destruction," he said quietly. Another officer looked uneasy. "The Void Swarm cannot predict them either." For the first time in many cycles, Kelter felt something unfamiliar. Fear. Not fear of the enemy. Fear of humanity. Back in the Sol system, Commander Elias watched rescue ships recover survivors from Titan's debris field. His officers celebrated the victory, but Elias remained silent. He knew the truth. Humanity was losing. Every battle cost lives. Every victory demanded sacrifice. But humans kept fighting anyway. Because survival was not simply instinct anymore. It was defiance. Suddenly, a warning signal flashed across the command screen. New Void Swarm fleets had entered the Sol system. Even larger than before. One officer looked hopeless. "There are too many." Elias stared at the approaching enemy ships for a long moment. Then he gave a calm order. "Send every mining vessel toward Mars orbit." The officer blinked in confusion. "The mining fleet?" Elias nodded. "If the enemy wants our system." A cold determination filled his voice. "Then we make every rock in space a weapon." Earth no longer looked like the peaceful blue world shown in old history recordings. Smoke covered entire cities. Fires burned across shattered coastlines. Above the planet, broken ships drifted through orbit like metal skeletons. The Void Swarm had reached Earth. Massive biomechanical towers landed across continents, digging deep into the ground while strange red energy spread through the air. Communication systems failed every hour. Satellites disappeared one by one. But humanity still refused to surrender. In New Jakarta, civilians filled underground tunnels beneath the ruined city. Engineers built weapons from factory machines. Old subway stations became military bunkers. Doctors worked beside former gang members and off-duty soldiers. Nobody cared about old differences anymore. Everyone understood the same truth. If Earth died, humanity died with it. Commander Elias Vey moved through one of the underground resistance bases with tired eyes. Around him, people worked without rest. Some repaired rifles. Others carried food and medical supplies deeper underground. A young woman with tattoos across her arms loaded ammunition crates beside a former police officer. Nearby, a scientist argued loudly with a mechanic while both tried to repair a damaged plasma cannon. The resistance looked messy. Unorganized. Chaotic. But somehow it worked. One resistance fighter approached Elias nervously. "We intercepted another swarm signal, Commander." Elias followed him into the communications room. The moment the signal played, the room became cold and silent. Strange sounds echoed through the speakers. Low whispers mixed with distorted human voices. Then images appeared on the screen. Burning cities. Dead civilians. Children crying beside ruined buildings. Several resistance members stepped backward in fear. One young soldier suddenly grabbed his head and collapsed to the floor screaming. "It's in my mind," he shouted. "Make it stop." The swarm was attacking human psychology itself. Across Earth, millions experienced terrifying hallucinations after hearing the signals. People saw dead family members. Old traumas returned. Fear spread through entire populations. That was how the Void Swarm defeated most civilizations. It broke their minds before destroying their worlds. But humans reacted differently. In another underground shelter beneath Moscow sector, survivors sat together while the psychological broadcasts echoed faintly through damaged speakers. A little girl covered her ears in fear. Her mother held her tightly. Nearby, an old mechanic slowly stood up and smashed the speaker with a metal wrench. The terrifying whispers stopped instantly. The mechanic looked around the room. "Then we stop listening," he said simply. The shelter erupted with relieved laughter. Across Earth, humans adapted quickly. Some soldiers played loud music during combat to block the hallucinations. Others covered helmets with handwritten messages reminding themselves what was real. Civilian groups created support networks inside underground shelters so nobody stayed alone too long. The swarm wanted fear. Instead, humans turned fear into anger. And anger made them dangerous. Far above Earth, aboard the Velker command ship, strategist Kelter watched combat recordings with growing disbelief. Human resistance fighters continued battling even after suffering terrible injuries. Civilians defended ruined streets with homemade explosives. Entire neighborhoods transformed into traps for invading swarm creatures. One recording showed human fighters retreating through a destroyed city while swarm drones followed closely behind. Suddenly, hidden explosives buried beneath the streets detonated. The entire district collapsed onto the enemy. Kelter stared silently. "They destroyed their own city block," one alien officer whispered. Another recording appeared. This time, a group of human civilians used damaged delivery vehicles filled with fuel cells to attack a swarm landing tower directly. None survived. But the tower collapsed. Kelter slowly lowered his head. "Why do they continue fighting when defeat is almost certain?" he asked quietly. No officer answered. Because logic could not explain humanity anymore. Meanwhile, deep beneath the ruins of London sector, Dr. Mira Soline studied captured swarm biological samples inside a hidden laboratory. The walls shook constantly from distant explosions above. A young assistant looked terrified while examining the strange black tissue growing inside containment chambers. It reacts to human stress hormones, the assistant said nervously. Mira looked up sharply. What? The swarm becomes stronger when victims panic. Mira stared at the biological readings for several seconds. Then realization appeared in her eyes. That's why it works so well against other species, she whispered. The assistant looked confused. Mira pointed toward the data screen. Most advanced civilizations removed aggression and emotional instability from their societies generations ago. They depend on calm thinking and perfect order. She paused. But humans evolved differently. Outside the laboratory, distant gunfire echoed through the underground tunnels. Mira continued quietly. Humans survived predators, wars, disasters, and starvation for thousands of years. Fear doesn't always break humans. The assistant slowly understood. Sometimes it motivates them. Mira nodded. And sometimes it makes them violent. Above them, the battle for Earth grew worse. The Void Swarm landed new forces every hour. Giant biomechanical creatures marched through destroyed cities while human resistance groups attacked constantly from hidden tunnels and ruined buildings. No front lines existed anymore. Every street became a battlefield. Every civilian became unpredictable. In the remains of Chicago sector, a group of resistance fighters hid inside a collapsed shopping center while swarm drones searched nearby. One fighter checked his nearly empty rifle nervously. We're surrounded. Another fighter grinned weakly while holding homemade explosives. Good. Makes aiming easier. The others laughed despite the danger. Moments later, they attacked. Not because victory was likely. Because surrender felt impossible. Back aboard the Velker command vessel, Kelter watched another failed swarm assault against human defenses. The enemy predictions kept failing. Human fighters ignored logical retreat patterns. Civilians refused evacuation routes. Small resistance groups launched attacks with no military purpose except causing confusion and delay. The swarm could not fully understand them. Neither could Kelter. One alien officer approached carefully. The swarm tactical systems are struggling to predict human actions. Kelter remained silent for a long moment. Then he activated footage from earlier battles across the galaxy. Perfect alien fleets had fallen quickly because they followed logical survival behavior. Organized retreats. Structured defenses. Predictable decisions. The swarm learned every pattern. But humans had no consistent pattern. They fought while afraid. They argued constantly. They ignored orders. They sacrificed themselves unexpectedly. They adapted too fast. Kelter finally spoke in a quiet voice. Their irrational behavior is not weakness. The officer looked confused. Kelter stared at the burning image of Earth on the screen. It is exactly why they survive. At that same moment, deep beneath Earth's surface, Commander Elias prepared another desperate counterattack. Around him stood civilians, scientists, criminals, engineers, and soldiers together inside the Resistance Command Center. None looked like heroes. Most looked exhausted. Broken. Afraid. But still standing. Elias looked at the people around him carefully. This was humanity. Messy. Emotional. Unstable. Impossible to control. Impossible to predict. And impossible to kill easily. A warning alarm suddenly echoed through the bunker. A massive new swarm fleet had entered Earth orbit. Several resistance members looked nervous. One young civilian quietly asked, "Commander, what do we do now?" Elias stared at the tactical display for a moment. Then a small smile appeared on his face. Something completely insane, he answered. The war for Earth had changed humanity forever. Entire cities were gone. Oceans carried the wreckage of fallen ships. Millions were dead. Yet somehow, humans still fought with the same stubborn determination that had shocked the galaxy from the beginning. But now the war was spreading beyond the Sol system. The Void Swarm was no longer simply attacking. It was running. Commander Elias Vey stood inside the bridge of the human carrier Resolute while damaged ships drifted around Mars' orbit. Emergency lights flashed across control panels as officers studied new intelligence reports from deep space. Dar. Mira Soline entered the room carrying several old data drives recovered from a destroyed alien archive station. "You need to see this," she said quietly. Elias looked exhausted. Dark circles covered his eyes from weeks without proper sleep. "What is it?" Mira placed the drives into the command console. Ancient star maps appeared above the bridge in glowing blue light. Strange symbols moved across the hologram while forgotten alien languages translated slowly into human text. The room became silent. Entire galaxies burned across the ancient footage. Massive civilizations disappeared into black storms moving between stars. Planets cracked apart without explosions. Fleets vanished into darkness as if reality itself erased them. Even the Void Swarm appeared in the recordings. But not as conquerors. As prey. Elias stared at the footage carefully. "That's impossible." Mira shook her head slowly. "The swarm wasn't invading the galaxy," she said. "It was escaping something." A cold silence filled the bridge. The ancient recordings identified the threat with only one translated name. The null entity. No clear images existed. Every recording became distorted whenever the entity appeared. Entire sections of data were corrupted beyond repair. But one message survived. A warning left behind by an extinct civilization. "Order invites extinction." Another officer frowned. "What does that mean?" Mira enlarged the final surviving records. The message explained how the null entity hunted advanced civilizations by studying their patterns. Highly organized societies became predictable over time. Their centralized systems made them easier to understand. Easier to erase. The Void Swarm had been created long ago as a desperate weapon against it. And it had failed. Elias slowly leaned back in his chair. So every civilization the Concord admired was exactly the kind of civilization this thing destroys, Mira finished. Far from Earth, panic spread across the remaining core worlds of the Galactic Concord. Far from Earth, panic spread across the remaining core worlds of the Galactic Concord. Without stable communication networks, many advanced civilizations began collapsing almost immediately. Entire populations waited helplessly for central commands that never arrived. Automated systems failed one after another. Food supplies stopped moving between sectors. On several worlds, riots exploded within days. The great civilizations of the galaxy had depended too heavily on perfect order for too long. And now that order was dying. But humanity adapted differently. Human colonies were already used to disaster. Mining settlements learned to survive with little support. Outer colonies repaired damaged systems with improvised tools. Civilian groups organized local defenses without waiting for permission. Humans argued constantly, changed plans constantly, and ignored rules constantly. For the first time, those flaws became an advantage. Inside the cargo bay of the Resolute, human volunteers loaded medical supplies onto rescue transports while engineers repaired damaged alien ships nearby. One young pilot looked confused while watching frightened alien refugees enter the hangar. "Aren't these the same people who abandoned us?" A mechanic shrugged while tightening bolts on a damaged engine. "Yeah. Then why are we helping them?" The mechanic paused for a moment. Then he gave a tired smile. "Because we're human." The rescue fleet launched hours later. Dozens of old human cargo ships traveled toward collapsing Concord territories carrying food, medicine, and evacuation teams. Most of the ships were barely held together after months of war. But they still flew. Their first destination was the Velker Dominion. The same civilization that once mocked humanity inside the Concord chambers. As the human fleet arrived, the situation shocked even Elias. Entire Velker cities had shut down. Massive automated systems stood frozen without central command signals. Citizens wandered crowded streets in confusion while supply shortages spread everywhere. The Velker had built a perfect society dependent on absolute structure. Now that structure was gone. Kelter himself met the humans at one of the damaged orbital stations above the Velker homeworld. He looked older now. Tired. Different. Human workers immediately began repairing station systems while medics treated injured civilians regardless of species. Kelter watched silently as rough-looking human engineers fixed problems his own advanced technicians could not solve. One human mechanic crawled out from inside a destroyed power conduit covered in oil and smoke. Try it now. The station lights flickered back on instantly. Nearby alien civilians stared in disbelief. The mechanic laughed proudly. See? You just gotta hit the broken parts hard enough sometimes. Kelter looked at Elias carefully. Your species should have collapsed weeks ago, he admitted quietly. Elias gave a weak smile. Probably. But you didn't. No, Elias answered. Kelter lowered his eyes for a moment. For years we believed humanity was primitive because your species lacked discipline. He watched human crews moving through the station. Some argued loudly while working. Others ignored direct instructions completely. Yet somehow the repairs continued faster than expected. Kelter finally understood. Humanity did not survive because it was orderly. Humanity survived because it adapted endlessly. Meanwhile, new reports arrived from deep space every hour. Entire star systems were disappearing near the galactic edge. No debris. No survivors. Only darkness. The null entity was getting closer. Inside her laboratory aboard the Resolute, Mira continued studying ancient records recovered from destroyed civilizations. Most of the data remained corrupted, but one pattern appeared repeatedly. The civilizations that survived the longest all shared similar traits. Decentralized cultures. Independent populations. Emotional unpredictability. Chaotic survival behavior. Mira slowly realized the terrifying truth. Humanity's greatest flaws were also its shield. The species evolved through conflict, disaster, fear, and adaptation. Humans never stayed stable long enough to become completely predictable. And unpredictability confused cosmic predators. Across the galaxy, stories about humanity began spreading rapidly. Alien survivors spoke of humans rescuing enemy civilians from collapsing worlds. Human cargo pilots flying directly into dangerous systems without hesitation. Earthborn mechanics repairing impossible damage with random spare parts and pure stubbornness. Many civilizations no longer saw humans as weak. Now they saw something else. Survivors. Several days later, the Resolute received a distress signal from a destroyed Concord refugee convoy trapped near the edge of dark space. The signal ended with terrified screaming. One officer looked nervous after hearing it. We don't know what attacked them. Elias stared at the star map quietly. The distress signal came from dangerously close to regions where entire systems had vanished already. Most alien commanders would avoid such areas completely. But humans were no longer thinking like normal civilizations. Elias turned toward the bridge crew. Prepare the fleet. The officer blinked in surprise. We're going there. Elias nodded calmly. If people are alive out there, we bring them home. No one argued. Because that was humanity now. Afraid. Exhausted. Outnumbered. Still moving forward anyway. The edge of the galaxy looked wrong. Stars vanished into complete darkness ahead of the Allied fleet. Entire regions of space twisted like broken glass. Strange waves moved through the void, bending light and silence itself. This was where the null entity waited. Thousands of ships gathered near the dark boundary of known space. Human warships floated beside damaged alien cruisers. Old mining vessels stood beside advanced Concorde destroyers. For the first time in galactic history, every surviving civilization fought under one command. Human command. Inside the bridge of the Resolute, Commander Elias Vey studied the massive fleet surrounding them through the main screen. Many ships were barely operational. Some carried civilians instead of soldiers. Others had no weapons left at all. Yet they still came. Because there was nowhere left to run. Dr. Mira Solene entered quietly beside Elias while officers prepared final battle systems. "The fleet is ready," she said. Elias nodded slowly. But his eyes remained fixed on the darkness ahead. It looked endless. Cold. Hungry. Kelter stood nearby wearing damaged battle armor from weeks of non-stop fighting. The proud alien strategist who once mocked humanity now looked at Earth's commander with complete respect. "Every tactical simulation predicts failure," Kelter admitted. Elias gave a tired smile. "That's probably why this plan might work." Kelter still struggled to fully understand humans. Even now. Especially now. Across the fleet, final preparations began. Human engineers welded weapons onto ships that should not even fly anymore. Civilian volunteers loaded supplies while alien refugees helped repair damaged hulls. Nobody waited for perfect conditions. Humans never had. Inside one crowded hangar, a young alien soldier nervously watched human mechanics attaching explosives to an old cargo transport. "That ship cannot survive combat," the alien said. The mechanic laughed while tightening a metal bolt with a wrench. "It only needs to survive long enough." The alien looked confused. Human logic still sounded insane to most species. But after everything the galaxy had witnessed, nobody questioned humanity anymore. Not after Earth survived. Not after humans rescued worlds that once abandoned them. Not after the impossible victories. Suddenly alarms echoed across the fleet. The darkness ahead moved. Entire stars disappeared at once. Then the null entity appeared. At first, many thought space itself was breaking apart. A massive black shape stretched across the void beyond the galaxy, larger than planets, larger than fleets, impossible for the human mind to fully understand. Red fractures moved across its surface like burning cracks inside reality itself. Ships across the fleet lost power instantly. Several alien crews panicked. Others froze completely. The entity did not attack with weapons. Its presence alone crushed fear into living minds. Throughout the fleet, soldiers began hearing whispers. Old memories returned. Regrets. Failures. Pain. One alien captain collapsed to the floor crying after seeing visions of his destroyed homeworld. But aboard human ships, the reactions became different. Fear spread through the crews. Yet humans kept moving. Pilots tightened their controls with shaking hands. Engineers kept repairing systems. Soldiers checked weapons while terrified. They were afraid. But they acted anyway. Mira stared at the horrifying entity through the screen. "It's inside our thoughts," she whispered. Elias nodded. "That means it can be distracted." Kelter looked confused. Distracted? Elias finally turned toward the command crew. "Begin Phase 1. Immediately, hundreds of human ships broke formation completely. Alien commanders stared in shock. The fleet became chaos. Cargo ships accelerated in random directions. Fighters ignored tactical patterns. Mining vessels launched uncontrolled debris fields into space. Nothing followed normal battle strategy. The null entity reacted instantly. Its attention shifted across thousands of unpredictable targets at once. That was exactly what Elias wanted. The ancient records had explained everything. The entity understood order, patterns, logic. But humanity had evolved through randomness and survival chaos for thousands of years. Humans made irrational choices constantly. And billions of irrational minds together became impossible to fully predict. Phase 2, Elias ordered calmly. Suddenly human ships began broadcasting millions of independent signals across space. Music. Arguments. Conversations. False attack plans. Random numbers. Personal memories. Entire networks flooded the surrounding void with endless human unpredictability. Alien officers stared in disbelief. Kelter slowly realized the truth. Humanity was overwhelming the entity with chaos itself. The massive dark shape twisted violently as reality around it became unstable. Entire sections of space flickered between existence and nothingness. It was struggling. For the first time in countless ages. The cosmic predator was confused. But the victory came with terrible cost. Dozens of ships vanished every minute. Entire fleets were erased by waves of darkness spreading across the battlefield. One by one, human vessels sacrificed themselves to keep the entity distracted. Inside the Resolute, warning alarms screamed constantly. Hull damage increased rapidly. "We cannot hold this position much longer," an officer shouted. Elias remained calm. "Just a little longer." Mira suddenly looked toward the tactical display with horror. The dimensional rupture is destabilizing. At the center of the battlefield, experimental human devices had begun tearing open a massive fracture in space itself. A doorway beyond reality. The plan was simple. Trap the entity outside the known universe forever. But somebody had to manually activate the final sequence from inside the rupture zone. Everyone on the bridge understood immediately. Kelter stepped forward. "I will do it." Elias shook his head. "No. You are humanity's leader now," Kelter argued. "Your species still needs you." Elias looked quietly at the burning battlefield outside. Ships exploded across the darkness while terrified crews continued fighting impossible odds. Humanity had changed the galaxy forever already. Maybe that was enough. He turned toward Mira. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Mira understood. "You knew this from the beginning," she whispered. Elias gave a small smile. "Somebody has to stay behind." Before anyone could stop him, he activated the command override and sealed the bridge doors. Kelter slammed his hand against the barrier. "Elias." But the commander was already walking toward the escape shuttle bay. Throughout the fleet, human crews watched the Resolute move directly toward the growing dimensional rupture. Toward the entity itself. Myra's voice trembled over the communication channel. "You don't have to do this." Elias entered the small shuttle calmly while explosions lit the darkness outside. "Yes," he answered softly. "I do." The shuttle disappeared into the center of the battlefield. Moments later, the null entity turned toward him completely. That was the final mistake. Elias manually activated the rupture core. Space itself shattered. A massive wave of white light exploded outward across the void. The dimensional fracture expanded around the entity like a collapsing cage. For the first time, the cosmic horror tried to escape. It was too late. The rupture dragged the entity beyond reality itself. Then the darkness vanished. Silence spread across the battlefield. The war was over. Across the surviving fleet, exhausted crews stared at the empty stars in disbelief. Slowly, communication signals returned. One by one, ships began cheering. Others cried. Many simply sat in silence, unable to believe they survived. Kelter looked toward the place where Elias disappeared. Then he spoke quietly to the remaining fleet. For centuries, the galaxy believed humans were weak because they felt fear. Around him, damaged human ships drifted through the battlefield beside surviving alien fleets. Broken. Scarred. Still alive. Kelter lowered his head respectfully. But fear was never humanity's weakness. Far across the fleet, human crews continued rescuing survivors even after the battle ended. That was simply what humans did. The alien strategist looked toward Earth's distant star shining far beyond the darkness. The galaxy finally understands, he said softly. Humans were never the strongest species. He paused. Only the hardest to destroy.